Good evening, everyone. So, we are back again for the final session of the 19th annual conference of Bharata Vidya Charcha Kendra, which has been held from 26th of February to today, the 28th of February 2021, and where we have been interrogating social crisis and configuring responses, Indian perspectives. For this final session of our 3-day national webinar, we have with us today two very esteemed speakers on the theme of crisis and remedies in ancient India. The first of them is our very own Professor Rupendra Kumar Chattopadhyay, who is the president of Bharata Vidya Charcha Kendra and also Vivekananda Chair Professor, University of Calcutta. He shall be speaking, and following his speech, we shall be interacting with Mr. Orko Prabhu Sarkar, who is Research Associate to Professor Rupendra Kumar Chattopadhyay at the University of Calcutta. Professor Chattopadhyay shall be speaking today on Disaster Through the Ages, a contextual historical appraisal. Without much ado, I therefore now request Professor Rupendra Kumar Chattopadhyay to kindly deliver his lecture. Ladies and gentlemen, Professor Rupendra Kumar Chattopadhyay.
Namaskar, Dr. Rai, Soumitra Rai. While introducing the major objective of this closing session in the context of the major theme of the 19th annual session of Bharat Vidya Charcha Kendra from 26th to 28th February, and the topics integrating societal crisis and configuring responses, Indian perspectives. It is unfortunate that we generally forget to test the antecedent of such theme, and obviously my major objective to remind us about the past history of the societal crises or disasters. Therefore, it may not be unwise to take into account the history of social crisis or the history of disasters through the ages, and certainly the remedial measures that has been taken in the past. For a considerable period of time, I, along with my student Orko Prabhu Sarkar, have been working on causes and consequences of disaster management programs of ancient India and the study of grassroots data, both archaeological findings and the literary sources. Mr. Sarkar, the main speaker of this closing session, will definitely touch upon or attempt to explore some aspect of social crisis and its bearing with the innovative mind to encounter or combat such consequences. However, here I would like to outline some of the major issues which needs our academic attention. Here it is worth mentioning that before entering the major issue, I must put forward a few words related to historiography of such discourse. Unfortunately, historiography, by following the nationalist approach, remain neglected in recent historical discourses or studies. For example, R.C. Majumdar, D.C. Sarkar, G.R. R.G. Bosak, D.R. Bhandarkar, K.P. Jaiswal, Altekar contributed various issues that provide enormous scope to explain the social crisis through natural and man-made causes. On the other hand, the historians who are contributing discourse related to history of epidemic along with cause and consequences never bother about the reconstruction of the antecedent and legacy of natural and man-made disaster. In his recent publication, Dilip Kumar Chakraborty threw enough light in this direction while talking about nationalist framework or national approach to study as well as writing history. Let me move on the next point, that is survival strategies of prehistoric man and their encounter with natural calamities or disasters, both man-made and otherwise. Here we must point it out the history of glaciation, that is first glacial, interglacial, second glacial, interglacial, third glacial, interglacial, and final glacial, that has numerous material or that has numerous mm, uh, uh, sources to study the climatic change and its necessary impact on the uh, cause and consequence of disasters. If we go through the erratic behavioral pattern of the rainfall in early Holocene phases, if we study the Holocene adaptation, then we must find sufficient scope of research on how the early Holocene man, that is Mesolithic people, survived during the course of aridity. Uh, India has numerous examples of such condition. For nearest example, we may point it out, Birbhanpur excavation near Durgapur railway station and Pesra near Munger, which unfolded the history of desertification. However, the measures taken by the people remain unknown to us, but one may continue to search for new water resources and, subsistence. The people certainly uh, through migrations. Therefore, the wide distribution of microlithic tools in and around and other material remains that provide us some findings to substantiate our our uh, mm, basic issues. Similarly, the flood, uh, as for example, Puranic Mahaplavon, so as Noah's deluge in Mesopotamia, that certainly give us some thoughts to deal such historical discourse. Uh, Mr. Sarkar will certainly explain the protohistoric phase, how the Harappan people, the migration of Harappan people, the cause and consequence of decline of Harappan civilization, that is the another story or episode of such history of disasters and remedies of our ancient past. Similarly, early historic data, mostly epigraphic sources, provide the basic outline of the cause and consequence as well as remedies of uh, of past disasters. For example, Kharavelo's Hathigompa inscription talking about aridity and measure of water, excavating water reservoirs, and so on. Early medieval, particularly, this discourse encouraged us to know the term Koli crisis or the age of Koli and its relationship with man-made disaster through the process of Varna Shankara and the caste conflicts. Therefore, the theory of untouchability and other issues definitely take into account in this regard. Uh, in the context of the decline of Bronze Age civilization and the movement of the tribes uh, from Central Asia to South Asia, if you go through the work of V.M. Mashan, there will certainly find some basic issue or sources uh, to to migration of population from one area to other, and certainly some of the sources related to warfare activities, social conflict, uh, then changing pattern of survival strategies, how they managed everything accordingly. Actually, that these are the very lengthy discourse. I hope in future we'll definitely discuss this issue in a large scale. Here, today's finally in my today's speech, I have chosen to put forward an important historical discourse presented by Dinesh Chandra Sarkar on the famine of Kashmir. So that today's speech, I want to focus on how the famine of Kashmir could be treated as a major issue so far as the reconstruction of desertion the or the societal crisis in an area. Since Sarkar, an eminent historian of ancient Indian history, challenged the historical discourse contributed by the Marxist historians like Arya Sharma. If you go through the debate on feudalism and D.C. Sarkar's landlordism and tenancies in ancient and medieval India, then you will get enough evidence how the historical discourse proceeded. It is apparent from the work of Sarkar that he preferred the nationalist approach to explain the same. On the other hand, if you go through the R.N. Nundi's agrarian growth and social crisis, there you will get another episode or the reconstruction of the major issue related to social crisis. Here we must mention the Vivekananda Jha's work on theory of untouchability and other issues. While exploring the famine of Kashmir in ancient India, Sarkar suggested that there is no Sonar Desh, the term Sonar Desh or Ram Rajotto in ancient times in Indian subcontinent. Our age-old text numerously unfolded our settlement history with the full of famines, erratic rainfall, or the natural calamities, administrative disorder, that is Kushashan, and the social crisis of day-to-day life, Aura Jagota. He has pointed out the text Brihad Aranyaka Upanishad and Chandogya Upanishad, while referring to heredity and famine during the rule of Santanu in the Kuru Vangsha or the Kuru Desha, along with the evidence in the literature, that is cause and consequence of hailstorm, Shila Brishti, or the aggression of Pongopal, that is also recorded. Similarly, Jataka stories, that is Vishantara Jataka, is referring to the erratic rainfall, Anavishti, in and around Kalinga Desha. So that this is all these are very interesting story altogether. However, while exploring Kashmir in and around 4th century AD, Tujan I, the ruler who encountered famine because of ice fall or the hailstorm and the flood in the Kashmir region, and the geologist who worked on the theme, that is the melting of glacial seed uh, and and the flood of paddy field submerged due to the ice melting. So this is a very interesting story or episode altogether about the fact. On the other hand, if you go through the ruling period of Lalita Aditya, that is 725 to 611 AD, there also you'll get some interesting evidence related to Plavan or the flood in the Kashmir region, and the social crisis that took place during the time of Lalitaditya, and how he managed through the process of taxation, revenue system, and so that the price of commodities, everything. This is a very interesting one. Avanti Varman referred to Rajatarangini. If you go through the work of Stein, then you'll get some idea. Sholilo Plavan in the Trigami or Tegaon area of along the bank of Sindhu, that also recorded in the Rajatarakini, how the flood and the different measures taken by Avanti Varman to combat or encounter such type of disaster because of natural calamity. Harsha is another ruler who ruled between 1089 and 1101 AD. He is also during his reign, he also confessed or Ajagata or the social crisis, and what measures he has taken to tackle all this situation. Actually, if you go through the Jainal Abidin glorious chapter of Kashmir rule between 1320 and 1370, you'll also get sufficient sources to explain the goodness of the ruler to meet the demand of his subject during this crisis period. So that it is also a very interesting, different episode talking about the uh, uh, how the famine was also uh, mm, uh, 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 also prevailed during periodically, and how the ruler took appropriate steps to combat famine during his reign. Muhammad Shah is another ruler of 16th century AD. He also his period also known for famine, and so that there is a long story of Kashmir famine depicted in the work of Rishi Sarkar. However, my basic uh, focus, that is uh, our age-old literature, not only talking about the cause and consequence of disaster, but also innovative ideas that develop during the course of time. I hope uh, my co-investigator or academic associate or Prabhu Sarkar will try to give an outline or some relevant data in this major issue, and will definitely come out with a major publication with the basic objective of today's paper. Thank you.
So thank you so much, Dr. Rubindra Kumar Chattopadhyay, for your very erudite introduction. And we are very certain that whatever points you have raised, those will be continued on by the next speaker, Orko Prabhu Sarkar. Orko Prabhu Sarkar shall be speaking on crisis and remedies in ancient India and appraisal, which is, as just now Sir has said, is a part of a larger investigative process. So Orko Prabhu Sarkar, who is a research associate to Dr. Chattopadhyay, shall now be delivering his lecture. Most welcome, Orko Prabhu Sarkar.
Thank you. So, a very good evening to one and all present here. I would like to extend my formal thanks to Bharat Vidya Charcha Kendra for providing me with this golden opportunity to share my views, my opinions, my thoughts regarding the little knowledge I have regarding disasters, regarding crisis, and their remedies in ancient India. I would also like to extend my sincere thanks and gratitude to Professor Chattopadhyay as well as Mr. Roy for introducing me in such benevolent light. It is always an honor and privilege for me to be here to share my views with you. So, to start with, it has been over a year now that we have been going through one of the most precarious phases in our life, perhaps one of the most terrible moments in human history as well. The COVID-19 pandemic has absolutely taken over us. Billions of people are sick, millions have died, people are sick, they are crying, they are dying. It's a terrible state of affairs. But apart from the physical loss that this COVID 19 pandemic has caused, it has given birth to a sense of social claustrophobia. We are confined to our homes, we cannot go out, we cannot meet our friends, our relatives, our quotidian jobs are hampered, are hindered, and every passing day, it seems, is a day in confinement, a day in imprisonment, and we are fed up with it because it has been quite so long. The virus doesn't seem to recede at all, and things are getting worse day by day. So, quite naturally, we all are lamenting, we all are cursing ourselves. That day I was lamenting too. I was saying that, oh God, why did you put me through this? Why am I being put through such terrible times? So it's quite natural for all of us to curse ourselves to because we are so confined to our homes. We might consider ourselves to be one of those most unlucky generations who have to face such a time. But amidst all these depressions, I was a bit curious and inquisitive from a historical perspective that are we really alone in this perennial stream of humanity, in this long stretch of mankind's history? Are we really alone who are facing such a crisis? So, to alleviate my curiosity, to soothe my inquisitiveness, I found it perhaps useful to have a look at certain books, certain textbooks in history, certain archaeological sources, certain archaeological works, and so I just had a look at them. But believe me, once I went through them casually, my inquisitiveness increased. I became all the more curious, and I thought that no, I need to study them more, I need to look at it more. And I can assure you, I can assure you all that anybody who goes through these works on archaeology, on history, casually, is bound to get convinced that we are absolutely not alone to have faced this crisis. Rather, crisis, whether it be health pandemics and epidemics, whether it be natural disasters or man made hazards, whether it be social or political turbulence, cultural tumultuous times, they have been an evergreen companion of humanity ever since the dawn of civilization. Humanity has always been ravaged by crisis. I mean, just as Professor Chattopadhyay said a few moments earlier, in the prehistoric phase, even when civilization had not yet begun in a proper sense, the Pleistocene climatic phases, they are marked by vestiges of disasters. Coming to the histories of glaciation, the interglaciation phases, the tremendous climatic alterations that undertook, we are bound to accept, we cannot deny at any cost that they were marked by tumultuous natural times. If we go to the early Holocene phase, that is the phase of the Mesolithic people, we can find innumerable archaeological remains which would convince us to believe the emergence of sudden aridity. For instance, the Trans-Vindhyan area in India, around Bhimbetka near Bhopal, Lagnaj in Gujarat, they all demonstrate settlement hazards and dried up Godavari basins. Archaeological sites like Inamgao, Nevasa, Daimabad, Jorwe, Adam, etc., could be viewed to substantiate this development. Inscriptions like Hatigumpa inscription of Kharavela or the Junagadh inscription, they are replete with references to water crisis, the crisis of a quotidian crisis that people had to encounter in ensuring their subsistence. So, one thing I can say with conformity that crises were always there. But there is a very positive part to this story, which we need all the more right now at this moment of time when we are suffering from this COVID-19 pandemic. That at whatever stage man has faced this crisis, he has always stood up to that challenge. Sometimes with surprising success, sometimes appallingly with failure. But what is important is that he has always stood up to that challenge. The fact that the ancient man used to live in caves, he used to dwell and inhabit the caves, is a testament to the fact that he had that spirit to fight natural disasters. We can come to the biblical story of the Old Testament, the Noah's Ark. So when Noah and his family came to know of an impending flood, a deluge that they believed would wipe out creation, they created an ark. And interestingly, to prevent an entire destruction of human life, they collected two specimens of every living species, preserved them on the ark, and once the flood receded, life had a new beginning. In ancient Iraq, about 3200 BC, in about 3200 BC, there lived a community called the Asipus. These people acted as a disaster management headquarters. Whenever in ancient Iraq, there was any sort of social crisis, people would come to the Asipus. The Asipus would sit down and indulge in what we in modern terms call a decision analysis, a disaster analysis. They would try to trace the genesis of disasters, try to trace the genesis of a particular crisis, and then recommend suggestions. So, if you want to come into the Indian sphere, the Junagadh inscription would tell us how canal conduits, how water reservoirs and dams were made in the peripheral regions of the Sudarshan Lake by Chandragupta Maurya, and since that time to handle the problems, the crisis of water scarcity. If we come to the work of M.K. Dhawalikar on Inamgao, even Jadunath Sarkar has written on it, how the Satavahana Empire combated social crisis, how it combated foreign invasions, which were, of course, one of the major political crises of the time, and at the same time, they encountered with remarkable success natural disasters as well. Transcending the fuzzy contours of time, if you reach to an ancient India, we can find texts like that of Charak and Sushrut, who were speaking of a natural well being of the people, who were speaking of surgeries, who were speaking of remedies to combat diseases. Given the remoteness of those times, it is really remarkable the spirit, uh, the spirit with which people combated this crisis in different ways. So, what one thing we can be sure about is that the ancient man knew how to combat crises. There were crises, and he combated them. So, now coming to the main part, how does a historian perceive crisis historically? Well, there are two essential points to it that I would like to make. Number one, he needs to understand, a historian needs to understand that disasters can lead him to better understand history rather than the other way around. We generally tend to think that historical analysis would lead us to appreciate crises and disasters, but that is not the case. Rather, a careful perusal, a careful study of disasters, a careful study of hazards, a careful study of pandemics and other crises can lead us to better appreciate history. Now, one important question which rises here is that how is this possible? This is possible if we see disasters, if we see crises, if we see pandemics as windows of opportunity, as harbingers of social change, as heralders of socio-cultural modifications, which they actually do. Any disaster, any crisis is bound to bring about changes within the society. So, if we are ready to perceive disasters and crises as harbingers of change, we can understand history through them because history, at the end of the day, remains a story of changes. And the second point that I would like to make is that we need to understand crises, we need to understand disasters as processes and not as events. We are generally predisposed to understand a disaster as a particular event in a moment of time, but that shall not be the case. We shall understand it as a process. What happens then is that if we consider a disaster or if we consider a crisis as a process, we see it in a continuum that begins from the past and reaches up to the future, passing through the present. So, if we can see a crisis as a continuum, we will realize that the COVID-19 pandemic or any other social or political or health crisis that we are encountering now represents merely a point, a singular moment in that long stretch, in that long continuum of time. So, it's very important to first fix our historiography, to first fix our historiographical prisms to better understand disasters and crises in ancient India. Having given this brief analysis, I would like to tell all of you a short story. A story which might not be absolutely correct because it is still under investigation, but nonetheless a very interesting one. Something which is not quite often discussed, but which I promise will be extremely interesting. Coming to in ancient India's blockbuster civilization, the most superstar civilization of the old world, something that we all have heard about, whether we are of history or not, the Indus Valley civilization, the Harappan civilization. I'm going to tell you a short story about a crisis in the Harappan circuit. But this is not going to be the story about its general political or social disintegration, as is often discussed. I would like to stress how a malarial outbreak occurred in the Harappan circuit, and it can be argued as it can be, I reiterate that it can be argued, it cannot be asserted as one of the plausible reasons which could have led to the disintegration of the Harappan culture, the proto-historic Harappan culture. So, there are a plethora of archaeological evidences, primarily material evidences, skull remains, biological remains, genetic evidences, which highly indicate the occurrence of falciparum malaria in the ancient Harappan civilization. So, coming to the evidences, we have skull remains which exhibit a sort of cranial lesions, which are also known as, in scientific terms, as porotic hypertosis or as cribra orbitalia. We have vestiges of tissue hypertrophy in the frontal and facial bones of jaws, coarse tribucutation, joint necrosis, skeletal and dental maldevelopment, and a number of other remains. The chief identifications have been done by Arnott and Duman, who acquired importance in this study. The prevalence of falciparum malaria has been archaeologically detected from the presence of such lesions in skulls owing to the symbiotic relationship between skulls and genetic hemoglobinopathies. Now, these are a lot of scientific terms. So, coming to the more easy explanation of it, malaria must have erupted in the Indus Valley civilization near about 4000 BCE. And it is argued that it generally occurred as a result of the Harappan people's contacts or encounters with people in the Near East or in Iran. There are two ways in which archaeologists suggest that malaria could have entered the Harappan circuit. One, through windborne dissemination, as Duman points out, and the other is through the human agency. Infected mosquitoes could have entered the Harappan circuit through ships. So, in addition to it, we have mercantile interactions, trade interactions between the Harappan people and the rest of the old world. We have human induced changes which brought such alterations in the environment that it made the environment conducive for the proliferation of the malarial protozoa. It seems from archaeological remains and from historical hypotheses that in the Harappan circuit, malaria would have been rampant between the months of June to November and somewhat less between the months from February to April. But having said that, it is highly probable that all throughout the year, malaria posed some sort of an epidemic threat in the Harappan civilization, wearing away the fecundity, the reproductive capability of the Harappan population. And this is not merely testified by archaeological evidences or historical sources. This is testified by ethno-archaeological sources as well. For instance, the practice of transhumans, which is still practiced in certain pastoral communities in India in this part of the year, can be can be appreciated as a testament of the malarial hypothesis in the Harappan circuit. So, but the important question is, having discussed the potential malarial outbreak in the Harappan circuit, what makes this malarial outbreak so interesting when we come to Harappa? What actually makes it so interesting is that malaria, as we all know, is a disease that is caused by the female Anopheles mosquito, and it's a protozoan disease, and the mosquito generally breeds in stagnant water. And for water to stagnate, choked drains, uh, a very poor sewerage system, a poor drainage system is almost a desideratum. It's a prerequisite. And that's why even today we find people making us cognizant of the fact that we need to clear our drains so that if we want to prevent malaria. So we can take it up as a scientific postulate that choked drains, poor sewerage system is a desideratum, it's a prerequisite for the outbreak of malaria. Now, the Harappan civilization, as I said that it is a blockbuster civilization, the Harappan civilization is particularly famous for its exquisite town planning and most precisely its brilliant drainage apparatus. E. Ernst Mackay had once written that when he reached Harappa and Mohenjo-daro, he could not identify whether it was an ancient city or a modern city due to its extremely well corbelled and well choked drains. So, to find a malarial outbreak in a city, in an urban space which is famous for its proper drainage system seems a bit paradoxical and ironical. But how do we explain that? There is only one way in which we may try to explain that, and that is that the drainage system in the late Harappan phases had largely declined. There was a deterioration in the drainage apparatus, in the drainage infrastructure, in the sewerage system of the late Harappan people. And what can be responsible for that? Historians generally are inclined to believe that a disintegration of the central authority a breakdown in the Harappan central mechanism was what led to a distortion in the town planning and hence a consequent decline in the proper drainage apparatus of the Harappan circuit. So this brings us to a very interesting and a very new position and juncture in historical interrogations. Because if you really believe, which we can, given the archaeological sources, that Harappa was a victim of malarial outbreak, Harappan civilization was the disintegration of the Harappan civilization was largely a consequence of malarial outbreak, then we ought to believe in the hypothesis of a decline in the Harappan central authority. Now, coming to the next part of it, floods. Floods provide us with stagnant water, and so they can also be a major cause of of malarial outbreak, and that is prevalent even in the Harappan case too. And so we have evidences of flood, of deluge, of inundation in the ancient Harappan circuit. Flood as a theory has been much invoked by historians in arguing the Harappan disintegration, but none of them has still now invoked it to substantiate the outbreak of malaria in Harappa. But archaeological excavations have gleaned out evidences indicating floods and which point out to a possible outbreak of malaria. Silty clay deposits and blended mixtures of clay with building materials were found at Mohenjo-daro, which strengthened the flood theory. Rake's famous work, The Mohenjo-daro Flood, has much to say about the silty clay deposits and how he postulates an inevitable occurrence of flood in the Harappan circuit. The idea of tectonic upliftment of the lower Indus plain resulting in floods and a complete deluge was first expounded by Dayaram Sahni, the great Indian archaeologist. The foundation of Mohenjo-daro, mostly on massive platforms, also has something to tell us about the frequency of floods. Uh, uh, Rakhaldas Bandyopadhyay, R.D. Banerjee, had once passingly pointed to that, but given the great mind he was, his arguments we of course cannot take for granted. So, given the archaeological evidences, given the historical sources, and given the historical prism about disasters and crises we have, we can. I'm not saying that there was definitely a malarial outbreak. There was, and even if there was, it had definitely led to the disintegration of the Harappan society. But of course, the malarial hypothesis provides us much space and much credibility to investigate this issue. So, to conclude my speech, given the particular episode of the Harappan story that I upheld, what I essentially tried to point out, particularly in the COVID-19 context, is that crisis, disasters, pandemics, epidemics, social turbulence have been an evergreen companion of humanity. Man has always rose up to it, and so, despite all the depression we have, we can employ a historical perspective and console ourselves that we are not alone in the stream of humanity who are suffering from this crisis. Men have perished earlier as well. That's a very sad part of the story, but men have fought it too. For instance, we can find evidences of it from parts of India even today. For example, I would say, for instance, the Johar. It's a crescent-shaped dam of earth and rocks still found in the states of Uttar Pradesh, Haryana, and Rajasthan. But it is argued as one of the oldest rainwater harvesting mechanisms in India. And so it can be traced even back to 1500 BC. We have the evidence of the Ahar pines, which Kautilya writes in his Arthashastra. He mentions of the mechanism for the construction of irrigation sources and their ownership and administration, which led to better sustenance, better crop irrigation facilities in an ancient India that was struck by water crisis. So, given the evidences we have of disaster management, given the evidences we have of crisis, and yet people fighting them over the ages, over the centuries, I think we have enough reasons to be patient, to be consoled, and to be confident that despite all the depression, we will surely come through. I extend my thanks to Bharata Vidya Charcha Kendra once more. Thank you very much.
Sir, I'd be very grateful if you could make certain comments on the presentation of Orka Prabhu Sarkar.
Actually, it will be a good paper, and and there are plenty number of evidences in the later period, that also throwing light on the how the migration of population from one area to other is another issue related to social crisis, social conflict, and other. If you go through the evidence of Sonauli, recent discovery of chariot and burial ground at Sonauli near Bagpat in Uttar Pradesh, then you'll get some idea how the movement of population from one migration of population from one area to other, or the social crisis that has been taken place, and the burial goods, and so the warfare activities altogether will definitely the cause and consequence of the entire thing. Similarly, as I told you, if you go through the Mason work related to decline of Bronze Age society and migration of people from Central Asia to South Asia, that is also the another episode talking about social conflict and the migration of population from one area to areas other area for the search of agrarian pace or the water resources, because the course of aridity in Central Asia to South Asia is the major factor so far as the migration of people. Similarly, warfare activity and the struggle between one ruling power to other. For example, the invasion of Alexander, and the story about the movement of Alexander in and around northwestern frontier, and the other part, and the retreat of Alexander to Macedonia, so that, or Babylon, so that these are the entire episode related to social crisis, erratic behaviors of climate, and the adaptation of one people in one new area, that is also the major factor altogether. Uh, if you go through the rise and the fall of the Kushanas or some other ruling power like Parthian, Indo-Scythian, and then Shoko, Khatrapo, Mahakhatrapos, and their penetration in India, there must have been social conflict, warfare activity, so history of warfare activity, history of social conflict, and other issues that is more burning evidence related to our concern objective or the paper. Similarly, the social crisis should be read in terms of the scarcity of food capacity, the 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 migration of a group of people in new area for search of better pace for food, changing pattern of survival strategy, and so as the issues of Borno Shankara, so that is the amalgamation of caste system and conflict of caste, intercaste marriage and other issues that also have been taken place during the course of time. I'm really happy with your special emphasis on the Harappan civilization, particularly malaria, and I'm also looking forward for further research on the basic issue and to develop more yeah, more grassroots data uh, and the remedy. For example, since you have worked on Chorok, Sushut, so that how the innovative ideas in our past to combat the better health care, to combat different disease, remedies of different disease and etc. As you know, how the Charok Sushut and other medical texts that provide enormous knowledge to combat different disease or the goodness of the society. So thank you, Orkovo, for your.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir.
For a very nice presentation, as Sarah said. So we hope to hear you sometime in the future very soon and wish the very best for your full paper. Thank you so much for joining us. Sir, now we'll shift to the next part of our program, which is the presentation of papers. Yeah, the technical session. And we have already in waiting Dr. Debjani Chakraborty, who belongs to Law College, Durgapur. And her paper is called Reformulated Crisis Faced by Burdwan Slum Women in the Era of Globalization. I now request Proloy to kindly allow in Dr. Debjani Chakraborty so that we can begin the technical session. So we will be having 10 to 12 minutes per paper. We have 10 to 12 minutes per paper for presentation. Now, Bapon Chakraborty with us. He's just joined us. Bapon Chakraborty is a student at the University of Burdwan, and he shall be speaking on pandemic, stigmatization, and crisis in social value, a sociological review. Bapon, you will be having 10 to 12 minutes for your paper. You can start your paper now.
So thank you. I'm Bapon Chakraborty, ex-student of the Department of Sociology, Burdwan University. My topic is pandemic, stigmatizations, and the crisis in social value, a sociological review. In this paper, my main objective of this paper is to analyze and review some social behavioral during the pandemic situation, and to view the stigmatization process in the name of pandemic, and how the stigmatization create a crisis in the social value. In the introduction part, I say that when a disease outbreak and spread across the country or the continent, it's called a pandemic. The pandemic is not a new phenomenon. If mankind has gone through these kinds of unfamiliar circumstances, that is the novel coronavirus. This is the pandemic which reshaping the human lives, creates new norms and break norm through the social in a different way. The fear of spreading infection through the disease of society has stopped in every manner, and unfamiliar circumstances teaches us how to cooperate each other and show the inner structure of the societal fabric. My next part is the social behavior, the change in reality. According to the Homans, the social behavior is a behavior among two or more organisms within the some species, and encompasses any behavior in which one member affects another. During this pandemic situation, the responsibility, security, confidence, and the health is the crucial element for challenging every crisis. But we have seen the adverse reality, like high individualistic aims, non-cooperative attitudes, and The next one is of the social distancing and the self quarantine method is the possible method to break the infection chain. But people catalyze every possible method in a different way. Best social practices are utilized in a negative approach. According to WHO's, in India, 65% people who are both infected or not gone through the suppressive mental stress. Social distancing and the quarantine increases the high level of selfishness, cruelty, and turning to a person towards the depression. And the next segment is the critically view of stigmatizations. We know that according to the Irving Goffman, the social stigma is a disapproval of discriminated against a person based on the perceivable social characteristics that serves to distinguish them from the other member of a society. Goffman shows the stigma as a process by which the reaction of other spoil the normal identity. Two main types of the stigma are there. One is social stigma and the other is self-stigma. Social stigma, also called the public stigma, refer to the negative stereotype of the mental health problem. Social stigma are the commonly related to culture, gender, race, age, intelligence, and health. In the case of self-stigma, we relatively social comparison have occurred in this aspect. We have maintained that the distance from the person, but in reality, we maintain the distance from the person through the use of stigmatized attitude. In the case of self-stigma, we have maintained distance from our close relationship due to the fear of spreading infection. We sincerely separated from others. Through the use of stigma, the body essentially encompasses through the power of disease. According to the Michel Foucault, the subjective aspects of self-suppressive and striving towards the normalization. Stigma creates an individual, a docile body. And next segment is reshaping norms and the crisis in social value. The creating rules for the social interaction in a new normal way. Society introduced some lockdown rules, wearing masks, social distance, using sanitizer, quarantine also have some the pre-event element. Social cultural shifts also affects the social fabric of our community. High level of individualism, own motive self specification sometimes breaks the social rules and norms. Accountability, responsibility, honesty, cooperations, humanity also both affected. Without the wearing masks, without helping others, we have enjoyed some critical condition like a silent spectator. Telephonic or virtual interaction is not only the proper solution to help or cooperation. Without trying to help other, we depends on the frontline worker, NGO activist for help. Lacking of help in community, which shows that the create a social which affected on our social fabric. No one have raised the concern to help the poor and provide food and other amenities. Through this social media, we only create a hyper reality, which Jean Baudrillard, the sociologist, has shown. In the proactive sense, we shows we are in the community, but in the real, we have maintained a distance from the other minutely. Everyone have gone through the experience regarding excess food storing mentality, breaking the lockdown rules, not wearing masks. All those mistakes highlight the crisis and the value. Therefore, it comes to a discriminatory legal procedure. And my last and conclusions is that in this paper, I shows that the COVID-19 crisis has disrupted the normal practice of social, economic, and cultural exercise. In recent time, we have experienced a global scenario, socio-economic crisis that was unexpected. Its impact cannot be readily modeled using the standard social science method. The pandemic issues will never be behind us. We will never be beyond them. COVID-19 is kind of a social kaleidoscope, reaffecting and social phenomenon, but reassembling them in a new familiar formations without a familiar vividness. Bauman wrote that critically how sociology might be extended or the all social researches. It has been engaged in a mimetic relationship with its object, or rather it's imaginary that the object is constructed and accepted as frame for its own discourse. The eyes of communities watching each individual because they believe that the many will be affected whenever one has taken a path which is contrary to the norms of the society, and the beliefs shared that the value is essential for the humanity, is the time to create a new knowledge pathways towards for a better society. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Bapan Chakraborty. May we please have the chair, Dr. Rupendra Kumar Chattopadhyay, please. May we please have back Dr. Rupendra Kumar Chattopadhyay for his comments on this paper.
It's a good paper altogether, talking about the research as well as the sociological perspective, how to encounter the cause and consequences of the pandemic, particularly COVID. However, it is my just inquiry. Being a sociologist, how could you reconstruct the day-to-day interaction between health official and the social social activist? This is my just an inquiry as a by following the sociological methodology.
Okay. Actually, sir, I in this paper I mentioned that the hyperactivity, Jean Baudrillard already said, through the social media. If we want to equip damage control aspects, the social media is the main thing we can utilize through this, and as well as I think that social activists or in the cases of other NGO activists, we already gone through this the kind of social scenarios actually.
Okay.
Hello.
Yes. Soumitra, any other question from any
No.
Participant?
No, we don't have any questions related to this paper. So our next presenter is Dr. Debjani Chakraborty, who, as I said, belongs to Law College, Durgapur. And the title of her paper is Reformulated Crisis Faced by Burden Slum Women in the Era of Globalization. Very good evening, Dr. Debjani Chakraborty. Please unmute yourself and make a presentation of your paper. Please unmute yourself.
Thank you so much. I am Dr. Debjani Chakraborty Shom, and good evening to all of you and respected chairperson. And I feel much happy to be part with all of you. So here is my paper, that is really crisis faced by Bardwan slum women in the era of globalization, and we know all that what is the globalization. Actually, globalization is a process of restructuring of everything that is included to people and the goods. And globalization now, this in this postmodern era, this is not the new. It is not the new phenomena to all of us. We know, and we are already been adopted by this globalization. And now I have already been done to the focus of globalization and slum. This is my focus area, globalization and slum. And now I'm going to tell you about what is slum. Actually, slum is not a new phenomenon. Slum, all of us, we know that slum is very, it is the living place of the downtrodden section. And of course, it is the very untidy and the very insanity place. And basically the people who living here, they are basically the poor people and under the BPL, that is related to the below poverty line. And so globalization and slum, and my focus, how the globalization process threatened to the slum. So globalization and slum is not a new phenomenon to us, but my focus is as a civilian people, we have the responsibility to bring them into the normal flow of the life. So how globalization is much more give the vulgar life to the slum. So this is my focus. So here the globalization and slum is a societal crisis. So my paper problematizes how the market increases in the globalization, how the market come to the slum, how the market and how the labor pushed back by the globalization. And of course, this leads to the threat to the land, labor, and the social policies. And this globalization also affects the slum areas, and this slum also change its characteristics. We can say that the globalization forced the slum areas to change its characteristics. And the neo-migrant section, neo-migrant, that means we know that slum is an urban problem, and in the slum the rural people are forced to come in the slum, because whenever the rural people in the character, by the characteristics of the globalization, they are forced to come in the urban place in searching of job, in searching of food, in searching of livelihood pattern and the surviving. Okay, so actually those people who are coming in the slum from the rural, so these people I am identified as a neo migrant section. And globalization threatened to all of the people, casualization of labor, that leads to the temporary labor and the temporary work, and dispersion of labor, that means actually labor are not being concretized, they are forced to segregated in their nature, and this leads to the crisis for both men and women, according to my view. And I'm going to the third slide, and especially my focus on the single woman, how the single woman living into the slums. Single woman, I mean to say that people are migrated from the rural areas. They are forced to migrate from the rural, especially the birthplace, from the birthplace, and they're coming in the urban side. So having no alternative, and they're having no place to live. So they are forced to live in the slums. So women and the family, they are forced to living in the slums. And these women, again, they are living alone, compelled to live alone whenever they are male persons going to abroad, or they have to take the in-migration and the out-migration because of searching again job and searching food, because we know that Bardwan is a very small place, and this is growing, this is already been declared as city, but the scope of job and the scope of any other securities are very poor. So that's why male person and the counterparts, maybe the husband and maybe the father and mother, they have to again leave the place from in searching of the job. So how the single woman can survive into the slums? So I'm focusing on these areas. So these women basically are migrated from rural sites, and they are forced to enter in the urban slum, and they have to face the vulgar life in slum from every aspect of the life. So vulgarity in the sense economical aspect, vulgarity in the sense political aspect, vulgarity in the sense social aspect, and on the basis of that, the consequences is very, very tough. What are the consequences? That globalization puts the rural minded single woman under some vulgar life like pros, call girl, venturing. Actually, slum characteristics, whenever the people become call girl and the pros, these are not the new. But my focus, the rural people, the rural characterized women, they are coming to the slum. They are forced to come into the slum, and actually they have to adopt with this pros, call girl. And what would be the social cost of their life? What would be the psychological cost of their life? For surviving of their life with the children. Okay, so they have to select these areas, and there have been always the value crisis occurs, and they become guardianless, and slowly is transforming as commodity. All we people, that when the commodity comes, So when the commodity, we treat ourselves as a commodity, so we also automatically choose to be like use and throw pen. Okay. And self alienation, and there of course the self alienation occurs. So whenever the self alienation occurs, they might be withdrawn from their family life, they might be withdrawn from their society, and sometimes they become mad, sometimes they become, they have to choose another life, another sector. So this is the vulgarity, this is the crisis of the rural ill-fated woman. So that's all, and thank you so much to all of you to give opportunity.
Thank you, Dr. Debjani Chakraborty Shom. We'll now ask Dr. Chattopadhyay to kindly sum up your paper, because we haven't received any comments. We haven't received any comments, sir, on the paper. So may you please sum up the paper.
Thank you for your topics as well as your concise form of speech. The only suggestion or only aspect I want to highlight, actually, while dealing with the housing society of a complex, this housing society is the slum of the Bhadralok. And similarly, the slum, your slum, the so-called slum, the housing society of disorganized and downtrodden people. Only thing, it is since you are working, since you are seriously working, you must, and you are from the legal study, so why not you are insisting the government before the establishment of Islam, the Sarkar or the government need a complete record, the pace they will occupy and their members, their livelihood, and their each and every detail, and how the slum radiated, so that the course of radiation, the course of migration, their original homeland, every record should be kept in our government record. And therefore government may make policy or insist them how they will stay very organizedly. So this is my just my plea to you. Since you are working is a good is a really a good research area, and it is my suggestion, please try to locate some scope of further research or your activity, how to tie up the government and the establishment of slum. So history of growing slum and the history of the record kept in the government record. So this is my hunch. So sorry, actually each and every housing society is a slum. I mean the staying together in a large scale.
Yes, sir. Yes,
so that if we look into the your slum, then we can organize this slum according to their priority, according to their livelihood, and we may suggest them altogether.
Yes, sir. Yes. Thank you so much, sir. Yes. You have rightly said, sir. You have rightly said.
Yeah.
Actually, my hunch is that areas, downtrodden section, the poor people.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
There are 37 slum areas in Bardwan town.
Yes.
Okay. So I have gone there, and I have yes.
But now my another suggestion is, you just try to record their each and every slum dweller and their original homeland, and their livelihood, and how much area they occupied, and how the growth of slum because of the increasing rate of family members and other. So that this is the this is just my suggestion, since you are working very hard to a very real cause of a cause and consequence of social crisis.
Yes, sir. Really, I'm grateful to by your suggestion. I'm grateful, but I want to say that in Bardwan town, this is a very small place, and 37 slums are here. And
Yes,
I have already recognized. I have done my doctorate on these subjects.
bah,
So
very good.
I have. Yes, sir. I have done this. I have done the slum areas, and I have collected the previous records that the previous slum people, they have come from the Munger, Bihar.
Hmm,
Okay, so they have come from Munger in Bihar.
hmm,
But my
hmm,
hunch is how globalization threatens to the slum.
hmm, hmm,
Globalization and the slums.
hmm,
Slum is not a
hmm,
new phenomenon, but slum
hmm,
is an urban problem. And
hmm,
apart from the Bardwan town, there are so many villages are there. Okay,
hmm,
so
hmm, hmm,
globalization changed the land use pattern.
hmm.
Globalization changed the land types, the labor
Hmm,
types.
hmm. Yes, yes,
Globalization
yes.
changed the social policies. That's why
Yes,
rural people only, they are only have the skill of agro labor. So
agro
there are
labor.
two types of peasants, rich
This,
peasants and the small
hmm,
peasant and the poor peasants. So rich peasant, they have sold out their land to the
yes.
government or to the company. But those people, I'm talking about those people who have only the skilled, who have only the skill as agro labor. So what they do,
Hmm,
is there any government
hmm.
policies towards them? So they
Yes,
they
yes,
they do not commit suicide. They are
yes,
forced to come in the urban sites. So how they
yes,
live?
yes.
So they do
Hmm,
not get any alternative. So they are forced to
hmm.
go to the slums. So my hunch is
Definitely.
there, how
Hmm,
globalization pushed them to the slums,
hmm.
and
Yes,
how the value crisis occurred there. So rural
yes,
people, slum people,
yes.
they know what is pros, they know what
Ah,
is colgan, but the rural
definitely.
people, they don't habituated with that.
Yes,
So
yes, yes,
my
yes,
my
yes.
focus is on them.
Yes, yes. I now I got your point, and so that the nature of interaction between urban society and the
Urban slum and
slum
the rural
dweller.
slum.
Yes,
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 sir.
yes,
Yes,
yes.
yes,
Okay.
yes.
Thank you.
Thank you so
Devjani,
much,
I
sir.
have
Thank
just
you so
one
much.
query. Devjani, I have one query for you. I have just one query. Can I ask a question? Devjani.
Yes.
Devjani, are you there?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
I had just one query because you belong to the
Yes.
legal profession. You have a legal degree. Therefore, I just wanted to know that when you are looking into the questions of say moral values going down and
Hmm.
the sort of alienation which is happening regarding the slum women, do you find that legal safeguards are there for these women, or can, can there be a mechanism which can be found out for such women? Can law take care of such women who are becoming, say, having to are being forced to go into prostitution or say into bad moral paths? Is there any way in which the law can help them out? Are there enough NGOs or legal cells which are there for them?
Sir, I want to
Yes.
say the answer by only one sentence. The legal system and everything depends upon who have the food, who have the educations. And whenever there is a question of your surviving and fooding, oh, if you have less food, then you don't think about the legal steps. You don't have any emancipation to take the legal steps, because you want to take the surviving, you want to live,
Hmm.
আপনি বাঁচতে চান, আপনার পেটে খাবার থাকলে তবে আপনি লিগ্যাল অ্যাওয়ারনেস নেবেন। আমি অ্যাজ এ কাউন্সিলর যখন যাচ্ছি, প্লিজ টেক দিস, আর ইউ এভার, তখন বলছে আপ তো খাতে পিতে ঘর কে হো না, आप तो खाते पीते घर के हो, आप कैसे जानो भूखा भूखा लोगों की दर्द। ঠিক আছে স্যার, লিগাল স্টেপস তারাই নেবে যারা অ্যাওয়ার, 1 নম্বর কথা। 2 নম্বর, যাদের পেটে খাবার আছে। সো এসব লিগালিটির কথা ইসলামে চলে না স্যার।
Okay.
এটা আমার, এটা
Okay.
আমার, এটা
Okay.
মাই
Okay.
এক্সপেরিয়েন্স স্যার।
Thank you so much. Thank you so
You're
much.
right, you're right.
I get your
হ্যাঁ,
point. I get your point. I get your point.
ওকে স্যার, থ্যাংক ইউ সো মাচ স্যার।
Debjani, thank you so much for your presentation. We'll
Okay,
now
sir.
begin the valedictory session. So, may I please request you to deliver the valedictory address?
Yes. I'm extremely sorry. I apologize for my incomplete valedictory address. Since valedictory address mean the entire proceedings of the 3 days seminar, so that I hope you will get the video recording, and you'll definitely, if you are interested to read the entire proceeding, you may get it through your video recording. However, I have no words to express my gratitude for inviting me to deliver the valedictory address of the 19th annual conference of the Bharat Vidya Charcha Kendra 2021 on integrating societal crisis and configuring responses, Indian perspective. I hope the participants have enjoyed the seminar academically and obviously enriched their knowledge, enriched us through their knowledge accordingly. I'm also extremely sorry, since it is a 3 days seminar, so that involvement of lots of scholars, stalwarts of different subjects, the technical persons and the anchor person, and the moderators, all together. And I hope Anirban Babu will definitely consider their name while giving them the vote of thanks. Apart from delivering the welcome address and conducting book releasing function by Professor Joydev Circle and the convener's speech by Dr. Shikha Aditya, the entire proceedings of the 3 days function is praiseworthy and definitely very fruitful altogether. And I hope if we duly considered the first priority to publish the proceedings of the entire seminar, then definitely it will be a remarkable job. And since some of the members of the of our Bharat Vidya Charcha Kendra worked very hard and tireless job to give the success, every success of this 3 days seminar, so that I have no word to express my gratitude to them. And now the rest thing is our scholars or participants definitely help us to submit their papers accordingly. First of all, Professor Kaushiki Dasgupta, Vidyasagar Chair Professor, Vidyasagar University. I must convey my gratefulness or thanks to her, who talked on political crisis along with the paper presentation by the others participant in on 26th, so that certainly all these papers definitely enriched our knowledge, and I hope duly considered for publication. S.K. Roy, Tinni Goswami, and other paper presenters in the next academic session on the same day will definitely provide enormous knowledgeable content while they have present they were presenting their major objective of their paper. Uh, and then I must record that altogether about 34 papers have been submitted, and around 24 papers read out in the seminars, if I am very much correct about the figure, and the 27th that is the next day of the seminar with us Professor Rup Kumar Barman. Unfortunately, Anil Kumar Sarkar, this is my information, couldn't read or presented his paper. Urjin Dev Sher Sharma was also, whereas Shobhasachী Dasgupta of Vishwabharati delivered their speech on the crisis and the participation of marginal groups in this aspect. Now, today's the closing session, the first session is a really a very fruitful session altogether. Professor Rajagopal Dhar Chakraborty, my friend of Calcutta University, and Professor Borun Kanjilal read out or presented a very scholarly paper, so that will definitely enriched with their presentation. And the last session by myself and Orko Prabhu Sarkar. Orko Prabhu Sarkar deserves our thanks for his papers. And I hope the organization will publish the proceedings accordingly, which will also badly needed. It is my humble submission to all of you. I fail to record the all participants and the all actively technical persons, moderators, and then and others like Dr. Soumitra Rai Mahashay, Dr. Shayantani Moitra, our beloved Domrupani Bhattacharya, Jayanto Kumar, Dr. Jayanto Kumar Rai, and others who worked hard to give the success of this seminar. Proloy Babu consistently worked for technical support. So I hope 3 days seminar will definitely encourage us to give a new dimension of our academic activity, so that we will definitely think over it. And this annual conference is not only for the sake of academicism, but also the other academic activity, research activities for our future work plan by the Bharat Vidya Charcha Kendra. Scarcity of fund, that is the scarcity of financial support definitely is a major hurdle altogether. So I hope the academic institutes, the scholars, the faculty members among the participants will definitely realize the constraint of this Bharat with the Charcha Kendra, and they will look forward for the betterment of our academic and research activity. Thank you to all, and thank you for giving me the opportunity to talk before you is a meager valedictory address. Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir, for your very, very kind words regarding the direction which Bharat Vidya Charcha Kendra has been moving, particularly with respect to the annual conference which we have just now held. We are all very aware that the pandemic has pushed us back by a few years, perhaps, in the way that life has rolled out. But we have throughout the year tried, on behalf of Bharat Vidya Charcha Kendra, tried to actually keep the whole organization afloat, its academic activities afloat. The publication of the proceedings of the last national conference, the annual conference, shows that we are on the right path. The English papers which had been presented at that conference are in press. We are in course of trying to have those published. And I'm very certain whatever papers have been published in this annual conference, we will definitely take it upon ourselves to have those published from reputed publishers as well. Bharat Vidya Charcha Kendra has tried to combat the pandemic in the best possible way by immediately shifting online. And throughout the year, we have had really have learned plenty in the way that life is rolling out in front of us. Now, as much as Shantani and I have enjoyed hosting the show over the last 3 days, it's been a privilege knowing everyone and hosting these shows despite all the technical glitches which have taken place from time to time. But we are extremely grateful to everyone for being so cooperative. And it is now, as is customary, it is now my great honor to ask Dr. Anirban Banerjee, the Vice President of Bharat Vidya Charcha Kendra and Professor of Sociology at the University of Burdwan, to kindly come over and deliver the vote of thanks for this annual conference. Dr. Anirban Banerjee, sir, please.
Thank you, Professor Rai. The 19th Bharat Vidya Charcha, the conference of Bharat Vidya Charcha Kendra is coming to an end. Before I begin, I would like to pay my humble tribute to Professor Bhaskar Chattopadhyay, our founder, and he himself is a very learned historian. He guided our activities till his death. He was active till his death. And we had vowed to carry on his unfinished task of promoting knowledge. The 19th conference focused on societal crisis and configuring responses, Indian perspectives. This conference itself is being held in an atmosphere of unprecedented crisis facing our civilization, namely the COVID-19 pandemic. Professor Joydev Sarkel, in his welcome address, focused on the multidimensional impact of this pandemic on Indian society. I thank him for enlightening us on this issue and also for publishing our our proceedings. It is one part of the proceedings it contains papers written in Bengali. Organizing a conference in the best of times is a tough job, and organizing a conference online is a real challenge. But an organizing team led by Professor Shikha Aditya, our secretary and respected convener, lived up to the challenge. She was ably assisted by Arjuma Ghosh and Shantanu Mitra, who were assistant conveners, and Damrupani Bhattacharya, who was our organizing secretary. The seminar focused on the multidimensionality of the crisis which faced Indian society in the past and also in the present, where we had 6 sub-themes, namely political crisis, health crisis, crisis and marginals, representation of crisis, economic crisis, and crisis and remedies in ancient India. A galaxy of erudite scholars focused on these themes. They were Professor Kaushiki Dasgupta, Dr. Saurabh Kumar Roy, Dr. Shobosachi Dasgupta, Professor Rup Kumar Burman, Professor Rajagopal Dhar Chakraborty, Professor Borun Kanjilal, Professor Rupendra Kumar Chattopadhyay, Dr. Tinni Goswami, and Sri Orkoprabha Sarkar. I thank all of them for accepting our invitation and contributing to our understanding of these crises. Professor Rupendra Kumar Chattopadhyay, in his valedictory speech, ably summed up the proceedings of the conference. I thank him for giving this valedictory speech. But before I conclude, I would like to thank our paper presenters. A galaxy of young scholars presented papers at the technical sessions. I also thank those scholars who presided over these technical sessions. And last but not the least, I would give a special thanks to Shantanu Mitra and Soumitra Rai for comparing these sessions. With this, I conclude my address. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Anirban Banerjee. I think we need to also extend our thanks to one more person, and that is Parthu Mukherjee, a very young, energetic man who has been one of the organizers of this show,
Yes.
along with Arjoma and Shantani. We also extend on behalf of everyone over here, we extend our thanks to Parthu Mukherjee for having done everything that he has been able to do over the last few weeks, actually, not just these 3 days, but the last few weeks. So that brings us to the close. Yes, sir, please.
I forgot to thank StreamYard for their giving us the technical assistance. So
okay,
I think
so
we should give
yes,
StreamYard.
I am also forgotten the name. Parthu Mukherjee. Several times he asked me and he helped me a lot.
Yeah, and thank you so much.
You are a very correct person for all these old age man to old age person.
No, it's okay. Thank you so much, both of you.
Okay, I'm really sorry for everything that I'm really sorry.
No, it's okay. Thank you so much, sir. We are absolutely pleased as punch for towards both of you for actually giving your time to Bharat Vidya Charcha Kendra, for guiding us through an annual conference. So, ladies and gentlemen, this is all that we have for this year. We will keep the flag of Bharat Vidya Charcha Kendra high, and we look forward in a year's time to convene again for the 20th annual conference. Thank you so much. Stay safe, stay healthy, and good night, everyone. Goodbye.
Good night.